This three-part video series provides an outline of animism, recognising its continuing attraction, explaining what it is, describing the animistic worldview, and illustrating some of the practices associated with it. It looks at expressions of animism in multicultural Australia. And as we explore various aspects of animism, I will present some biblical responses and reflections. And in this second video of the series, we consider some of the central features of the animistic worldview. First of all, consider what we might refer to as animistic metaphors. The anthropologist Paul Hebert observed that animists employ two basic types of metaphors in seeking to understand ultimate reality. First of all, there are organic metaphors, like a living being, and secondly, there are mechanical metaphors, like a machine. And so beings might include a high god, lesser gods and goddesses, demons, patron deities or guardian spirits who are thought to protect villages, ghosts and jinn and witches and ancestors, and humans and subhumans and half-humans, and human animals and plants and sun and moon and earth and rivers, and so on and so on. For example, the Ashanti people of Ghana typically believe in a supreme being, the sky god Nyam, and in other higher gods that they call a bosom. And they accord importance not merely to living human beings, but also to ancestors and the unborn, believing that a child only receives flesh and blood from the mother, but soul or spirit from the father. And they believe that animals and plants and trees have souls. And they also believe in fairies, in witches, and in forest monsters. Animists view themselves as being in relationship with such beings and see these beings also as having an ethical nature. So much for organic metaphors, but mechanical metaphors are also important for animists because they feel that there are also amoral, impersonal forces or impersonal laws of nature that they must deal with. And these include such forces as mana, magic, the evil eye, evil mouth, evil touch, omens, taboos, ordeals, astrology, medicines, gravity, physical forces, chemical forces, electromagnetism, and so on. And since these are not beings, animists can't employ relational approaches in dealing with such powers, and instead they seek to control such forces, often in a formulaic manner. And to a large extent, animism is pragmatic and utilitarian, and therefore does not demand any change in one's character or ethics. Now there's a classic example of this which occurs on Cerro Rico mountain near Potosi in Bolivia. Around 38 businesses, I'm told, run mines employing about 15,000 miners, last time I looked at it, including up to about 400 children. And this mountain is known as the mountain that eats men. And it's estimated that as many as 8 million people have died in these mines since mining began. Now, one of the significant things is that every one of these mines has a statue of El Tío, the devil, in their tunnels. And one of the mining bosses, he explained, and I'm quoting from him, El Tío has horns because he is the god of the depths. And he adds, usually we gather here on Fridays to make offerings in gratitude because he gave us lots of minerals and so that he will protect us from accidents. But what is particularly disturbing is this remark from this boss. He says, outside the mines we are Catholics, and when we enter the mine we worship the devil. Well, we've thought about some of the animistic metaphors. Let's think about animism and the nature of the universe as we consider the animistic worldview. Most animists fear outside power or powers, especially evil powers, which dominate their lives, and they long for deliverance from such powers. And while this is central to animistic concepts of salvation, it's also a feature of African traditional religions that salvation is portrayed as sort of cosmic equilibrium and a community acceptance of individuals. What do I mean? Well, take the Hava people of northern Nigeria. They illustrate this with their view of salvation consisting in being accepted first in the community of the living and then in the city of the dead. Now, the Boko people of Benin, they long for Aletheia, which is a state of balance and harmony with all of creation, and which will issue in total peace and control over their own lives, which is something they can only hope to achieve if they somehow manage to deal with the spirit powers correctly. It's very common for animists to believe in different cosmic levels, with some below the ground and some above the ground, and then also at sky level. And both in the ancient world and still in many animistic societies, including neo-pagan and New Age groups, there's a strong belief in what's called the cosmic or world tree, which is a very ancient idea. You find it in Mesopotamian religion, for example. But the idea is of roots in the underworld, the trunk in our world, and a canopy of branches and leaves in the sky world. Sprenger describes the world as seen by the Lamet people of northern Laos. Persons, according to this way of this worldview, persons have a body, and there is a living movement which is only characteristic of humans and animals and plants, which is expressed in growth and breath. But there's also soul that only occurs among humans and buffaloes, and in fact, according to early usage, is to be found in rice as well. And the human soul enables communication with the spirits, with the fee. And it often sees the world from their perspective. And the belief is that the human soul turns into a spirit after death. Illness and death, they result from the separation of body and soul, and so body and soul need to be integrated. And to make sure that body and soul are integrated, people must relate well to their ancestors, relatives and spirits. The spirits of ancestors are located in the forest graveyard. But the patrilineal ancestors of any particular household, they combine to constitute that house's house spirit. And both the house spirit and the village spirit are protective spirits which must be kept happy through sacrifices. And the spirits are not simply former humans, but they also include non-human beings of both the earth and the sky. The Hmong people are a people group which we find in the mountainous regions of southern China, in Vietnam, in Laos, Myanmar and Thailand. They divide up the universe into the seen world and the unseen world of spirits. And the unseen world of spirits includes ancestral spirits. And they believe that all natural objects in the seen world, whether they're rocks or trees or streams, they believe that all of them have a spirit. And such spirits may have a positive or negative influence. And the Hmong people believe that each individual person has multiple souls, but 3 primary ones. So these primary souls, there's one of them which stays with the body. There's a second that wanders at night while a person is sleeping, which is the cause of dreams. And the third soul protects the person from harm. And the way a person stays in good health is by making sure that these 3 souls, or all these souls, are in harmony with each other. And when a male or a female positively relates to the non-human spirit-invested objects of the natural world and one's spiritual ancestors, this also is integral to being well. The Hmong also believe that a person's lifespan is determined by a celestial being, and that when a person dies, he or she returns to the unseen world of the ancestors. Another example of how this animistic worldview works itself out. The Senoi, an indigenous people group in Malaysia, provide another example. In their case, they believe that everybody's got 2 souls. There's a head soul, and there's a heart or a liver or blood soul. And the head soul, it rests outside the body on top of the hair, and the heart, liver or blood soul is under the base of the sternum. And they believe that inanimate objects also have 2 souls, that animals have an upper and a lower soul, that plants have a leaf soul and a root soul, mountains have a summit soul and underground soul, and river, rapids, houses and deceased humans also have 2 souls. And you could look at people group after people group, and there'll be all sorts of variations, but we get some feel for the way that animists view the world. So I'll now summarise biblical teaching that helps us to respond to the above aspects of the animistic worldview. And although I mention some biblical texts, these are not intended as proof texts, but merely as partial indicators as to the truth of what is being said. In the first place, animists believe that their lives are impacted and affected for good or ill by many spiritual beings. And they believe it is necessary to have personal relationships with such beings. Now, from the standpoint of biblical Christianity, this is blatantly idolatrous behaviour, a denial of the all-sufficiency of our Creator. Our well-being is solely dependent on our personal relationship with our Lord. And we begin to grasp this truth as we observe how Paul speaks about God in his speech to the Areopagus in Athens. In that speech, he emphasized that the true and living God who created the world, I'm quoting here from Acts 17, is not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. And Paul added, for in him we live and move and have our being. He's the all-sufficient Creator. Now, the second thing to note in responding is that biblical Christianity does not deny the reality of other spiritual beings, nor does it deny that they have power. But it does teach that when people seek to have personal relationships with such beings, they are consorting with beings that are evil. And any experiences that may persuade animists that such beings are not evil provides further evidence of the depth of deception that is involved. In his first letter to the Corinthians, Paul comments, "For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things came and for whom we live. And there is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we live." Now, what Paul refers to as gods and lords covers all the spiritual beings that are recognised by animists. And later on, Paul warns that when pagans present sacrifices to their idols, they are actually offering them to demons. We read this near the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Now, while Paul is addressing the particular context in Corinth, his words apply to all religious rituals that involve venerating spiritual beings other than God. A third point to make in response. To a large extent, the relationships of animists with such beings are an expression of deep-seated fear and a consequent concern on the part of animists to protect themselves and their community from harm. Now, by contrast, biblical Christianity teaches that all spiritual beings, all spiritual powers that in any way pose a threat, have been defeated by Christ in his death on the cross. And so we read how God has disarmed such powers and authorities and has made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. There's a fourth thing that can be said by way of response. Animists typically seek to have continuing personal relationships with deceased ancestors. But the Bible is clear that the dead are totally separated from the living and cannot be accessed. For example, in the parable that Jesus told about the rich man and Lazarus, which you'll find in Luke chapter 16, in that parable it's made clear that there is no communication between the dead and the living. Indeed, it is an insult to God for people to try to contact the dead by any means. So if we flick back to the prophecy of Isaiah, chapter 8, we read, "When men tell you to consult mediums and spiritists who whisper and mutter, should not a people inquire of their God? Why consult the dead on behalf of the living?" We've already seen that ritual practices that seek a personal encounter with spiritual beings other than God, which includes ancestors, are engagements with demons. And so it follows that any experiences that animists may have that seem to indicate that they are in contact with their ancestors, for example, the appearances of ghosts, which many who are involved in ancestor worship have referred to as having experienced. But all such experiences really are to be understood as evidence of profound deception. A fifth point to make is that a failure to exclusively worship God, our Creator, always involves not only dishonouring God, but also dehumanising people. Now this is true of physicalists, or those who are committed to philosophical materialism, who treat people as biological machines, But at the other end of the spectrum, animism also seriously involves the degradation of our humanity. As those who've been created to rule over the created order, for the good of the created order, as those made in God's image, it is degrading for people to subject themselves to other spiritual beings and forces. And animists also do great damage to the integrity of their personhood when they treat people as having multiple souls, as we see among many animistic people groups. It is only a sound understanding of what it means to be created in the image of God which enables healthy and holistic integration of body and soul.